Hello, my name is Joe Archer, and today I will talk about the idea of eliminating 95% of our national defense costs, while at the same time making it infinitely superior. Now, of course, such a claim is preposterous, but because it cannot be said to be impossible, and because it is such a tragic waste, I ask that you hear me out. Our military industrial complex geniuses wantonly and unnecessarily spend $700 billion a year on just our nation's defense, which could and should be used for so many far more worthy causes. I will make the case for a defense that is infinitely more capable for a penny on the dollar. And as impossible as it is to believe that it could be done far better for far less, it can't be any more impossible to believe than the money we spend on defense. So how in the world do you design a system of national defense that can surpass our current military for 100 times less? I assert that the answer is what I will coin ballistic artillery. Ballistic artillery is the idea that it is possible to shoot a GPS-guided artillery shell 10,000 miles, thereby making irrelevant all concepts of all our conventional military forces. In a nutshell, military force is nothing more than being able to project force against a military threat, whether it is a bullet into an enemy soldier or a bomb on an enemy asset. And the goal of any country is to be able to do it with the maximum effectiveness and reliability and minimum cost and necessity. It will be argued that this objective is most intelligently and most economically achievable using the concept discussed here. If I were responsible for the safety and security of a free people against the aggression and insanity of those who feel authorized to kill others so that they can be in charge, this is what I would do. I would build a concrete form designed to fabricate a thick-walled concrete tube and suspend it from a barge in the ocean. I would run cables within the walls of the form as concrete is poured so that the finished concrete tube is a pre-stressed concrete tube. The thickness of the walls would be such that the tube would be able to either float or submerge so that it is in effect a concrete submarine. I would make this tube rather long, maybe 1 or more miles long, depending on a technical analysis of what is an engineering optimum. I would then outfit this tube so that it contained 1 or more carbon fiber reinforced cannon barrels, capable of accelerating a projectile to speeds of 5 miles per second or greater. A notable point about these barrels is that they could be fabricated relatively cheaply, as the barrel itself need not be exceedingly strong and would only need to be reinforced in one dimension, which is to say that they are nothing more than a light gauge steel pipe wrapped with carbon fibers just around its circumference. This is because the force of the propellant acting against the back end of the barrel would act against a breech attached to the concrete tube itself. Also, because the barrel is very long, the maximum gas pressure within the barrel would not be relativistic or stupidly large. Now, because this cannon tube is submersible, it can orient itself to fire in any direction. And because it is a concrete cylinder, it can withstand at least 10 times the pressure of a conventional submarine. With today's advanced concretes and the fact that a cannon could be lightweight, such a tube could potentially withstand the pressure of the average 2.5-mile depth of the oceans, so that it could be parked on much of the ocean floor as an unmanned military asset. But conservatively, it could be parked in a great deal of the ocean. Regardless, because of its nearly unlimited range, it can be parked within range of any potential target. So now let us assess its military advantages. A submersible concrete ballistic cannon offers orders of magnitude advantage in all three metrics of cost, defensibility, and offensive capability. First, we will estimate cost. Let's assume the most modest manifestation of this concept. A mile-long tube would require 2,000 yards of concrete, or about $200,000 worth, and a similar amount of steel reinforcement. An 18-inch carbon fiber wrapped cannon might cost $1 million. A fuel cell driven propulsion, ballast control, and targeting system could be relatively inexpensive. But for argument's sake, let's assume $100 million. In that these similar targeting systems are used in tanks and only account for a fraction of their $9 million price tag, I would argue that $100 million is way over any ethical estimated cost. Now consider its defensibility. While current subs float in the ocean at a depth of a few hundred feet, a concrete tube sitting on the ocean floor is about 1,000 times less detectable. This is because active sonar can see an object hovering in the ocean, whereas something sitting on the bottom can only be seen when radar is directed down and directly onto it using surface mapping technology. Additionally, concrete is mostly non-metal and could be camouflaged on the bottom simply by digging a trench in which to set it, in which case even ocean floor mapping radar would not detect it. Then there is the issue of survivability. If you wrap bubble wrap around the exterior of the tube, the shock wave from a depth charge or torpedo would be much less likely to even be able to critically damage the concrete, aside from the fact that concrete is much harder to penetrate than a relatively thin-walled submarine shell. And aside from all this, if a torpedo is directed at any submerged vessel, it's a simple thing to use a torpedo to destroy it, as torpedoes can, at best, only travel less than 100 miles per hour. So now, let us discuss offensive capabilities, as these are the whole purpose of a military asset in the first place. Ballistic artillery offers superlative performance in achieving the two metrics applicable to offensive capability, those being effectiveness and cost. As regards effectiveness, an offensive military capability needs to be able to accurately, quickly, and reliably project force against the target. This means that it needs to be able to hit its target, and in order to be effective, it must not only perform its function, but it must do this in a manner in which the enemy has no defense, either by moving the target or preventing a successful attack. So consider how ballistic artillery compares to our conventional forces. In order to project power, the first step is to identify a target. Once identified, the more quickly that force can be projected decreases the opportunity for the target to be lost. Currently, the way this works is that an identified target is attacked by sending airplanes or directing missiles to the target, both of which are not tremendously fast, are very expensive, and have the potential to be shot down. However, with ballistic artillery traveling at miles per second speeds, not only is the target struck 10 times faster, there is very little expense and no chance of being shot down. Consider one example scenario. Military intelligence identifies the location of an enemy command and control asset that is 1,000 miles away from any place in which it is possible to stage a military asset. One example might be locating where Saddam Hussein is deep inside Iraq, and the closest staging location is the Mediterranean Sea. Using conventional carrier group assets, a very expensive cruise missile or plane would take an hour and a half to reach its target, whereas a projectile traveling 3 to 4 miles per second would reach its target in 5 minutes. Aside from this, the damage yield of a hypervelocity shell would be nearly an order of magnitude greater, due simply to the velocity and kinetic energy of the projectile. So for the cost of just the high explosive needed to accelerate the artillery shell, 10 times more force can be projected 10 times faster. But this aside, it is highly likely that current air defense systems can shoot down either a plane or missile, but arguably completely incapable of shooting down a hardened artillery shell. Now, it is true that a full-fledged missile can traverse this distance quickly, but they are exorbitantly expensive, not even available for the most part, and not practical because of their expense. Aside from being an indefensible and extremely lethal asset, the platform from which they are launched would be extremely difficult to neutralize, as they could surface anywhere, fire their projectile, and submerge right away beyond the reach of even first-world military assets, even before an enemy knows they are being attacked. This idea of building submarines out of concrete while being extremely capable of projecting explosive force is not just limited to blowing the enemy up. It is also capable of delivering ground forces to even the most inconceivable locations with blinding speed. Currently, if we decide we need to put troops on the ground, we have to approach the target in broad daylight with an armada of surface ships, which then require days or even weeks to emplace ground assets. However, if you build a concrete tube that had a 20-foot inside diameter and was designed to sacrifice diving depth for buoyancy, 100 tanks and assorted ground vehicles could be lined up in the tube like a convoy. The front of the tube could be equipped with buoyancy tanks and a track drive, and the tube could be driven up a beach or even lifted out of the water into the air so that it could contact an ocean cliff like the shores of Dover. Not only would its approach not be seen until the last minute, but its 100 vehicle convoy could be offloaded in a matter of minutes. The thing about using concrete tubes as principal military assets is that they can be built for a penny on the dollar, do not have to be operated 24/7, are eminently more survivable and effective, and could be afforded by every military in the world, thereby reducing the opportunity or inclination for a sociopathic predator to attempt to inflict their will on the world. Ultimately, the best military is one that deters aggression instead of resisting aggression, while at the same time does not waste valuable and important resources in the process. Our current ultimate deterrence is to irradiate the world if it all goes south. However, with this concept, we can depend on a much less psychotic deterrence. Every dollar spent on a military is just another dollar not spent for the betterment of the human condition. And ending this insanity of grotesque military expenditures is not only an ethical imperative, it is so long overdue.